I think that preempted my next question, which was going to be practical ways that people can be a part of their school. And obviously, part of that is to read and to keep up to date. But do you have practical suggestions for maybe parents or grandparents? We've kind of approached it from the administrative hired side, but what about the families? You know, maybe there's a concerned grandparent or concerned parent or just a citizen who sees things happening in schools and they want to be a part of the change. And maybe they're even willing to be a part of that slow change. But what are some practical ways that they can get involved and build those relationships like you were talking about earlier?
The typically in schools, if you want to build a relationship, mostly it starts in the elementary. You know, elementary teachers are bombarded by parents that want to come into school. Typically, it was never hard to find volunteers to come into an elementary classroom. Now, we have all that, paperwork we have to do now to make sure that you're not a sex offender or you have some kind of criminal record. But other than that, elementary, you're going to find tons of parents, and they attend every event, they attend every function, they're supporting the kids. Oftentimes, they are, a teacher helper. Before the peanut butter scare, with all that allergy stuff, parents would bring in snacks, periodically. That was part of the routine. So as the kids matriculate up into the middle school, now the middle school age, basically the kids don't want their parents anywhere near around. Uh, that's just the nature of their mentality as they go through adolescence, and they're learning to be more independent. And so middle school, you really need to start working with your parents and parent groups, parent advisories. And of course, that's where you get your PTAs or whatever that they name it, and you get some help that way. But again, parents should never, ever disengage. They should be attending every one of their kids' activities, be it sporting. Sports are a phenomenal community activity. I tell you, as an old principal, if you had a successful football team, you had a good year because that brought everybody together. If you want to hear grumbling, have an unsuccessful football team and be in the press box listening to the parents talk. It is not very pleasing. But those kind of things make a difference. But you can get involved. And by getting involved there, you hear other people talk, and you're also sharing experience. And again, it's relationships. It's about developing relationships. And then as you come into the academic 912, more academic side, that's where we actually, in the school I worked with, we developed relationships. So what happened was I required every eighth grader and their parents to meet with a counselor, and it could have been a counselor, and we didn't have a lot of them. And it could have been a dean of students. It could have been me, and the first year it was me because I was building the program. But when I started telling parents, what do you want 4 years from now, it created a whole new conversation that parents had never had. I said, we need to be deciding where we want your child to be taking their first step towards. Now, I said, I can't guarantee that when they take that first step towards something that they'll be 100% successful. But I can guarantee you I'm going to help your child take that first step to something. And that created what we call a whole career plan. We had a whole career kind of options and majors. And so I said it's very strategic now how you choose courses. So that really brought our community together. It really grew the school. And they saw the school now not as a bunch of these money grubbing teachers that want to make big bucks and not work very much, not like a real person. You've heard people talk like that, you know. And so it changed the whole perception. It changed the whole relationship between teachers and kids and teachers and parents. And we did that. Then we would touch base with the parents again about 10th grade. Now, we touched base before that, but 10th grade we made sure that we touched every parent that wanted it. And we said, okay, we're on the final stages here. Are we on track? Have you changed your career path? Do you have some different ideas? But again, touching base and that high touch, it took time, but it was worth the investment. And also from my side of the fence, it was interesting because then I had some idea of things I need to be planning programmatic-wise to have in place when those kids got there. And it wasn't just a last-minute willy-nilly. It was, well, we have this group of kids that they want these advanced placement courses, or they want this, or they want that. Well, you got to figure out how you're going to do that. You don't do that last minute. So it was a win-win, but it involved the parents. And you can't run a school without involving the parents, even the parents that sometimes you would wish weren't involved. That's just the nature of the business. There are helicopter parents. There are lawnmower parents are the ones that come in and they want to mow you off. But you just have to deal with them as best you can, and be truthful with them. And that's probably the other piece that you read a lot in literature now is transparency. We had tons of transparency. If we couldn't do something, we told them we couldn't do that, or it was too expensive or whatever. But we always dealt with them up front, fair. The largest school board meeting that I ever had in my career, and is still the largest school board meeting on record in that school district. As a young principal, I didn't really realize the power of the parent. Because when you're young, you're sort of dumb, and you just simply say, well, this would be a good change to make. So I made a change. I changed the time and the schedule. In the olden schedules in high school, band was the central subject that everything was scheduled around. So I had really smart band, and the best kids are in band. Let's face it, the best kids are in band. And so these kids wanted to take advanced courses, but they couldn't take it because it fell during band period. And I, being young and quite naive, I said, you know what? I just don't see why kids have to make that choice. Why can't they have it all? So I moved band to before school. And that was the very first thing that happened. Actually, I had a special bus run, pick up all the band kids and bring them in. Well, that caused quite a stir because, I changed tradition. And the first board meeting filled up the whole cafetorium in the elementary school. They had to put up chairs. And the board was up on a little mini stage. And the parents, basically, I was the sacrificial lamb. The board put me there in a position. And I gave my presentation about why we should be doing this. And, this was the day and age before PowerPoints and stuff, so I had an overhead projector. You could just imagine. And the parents were grumbling, that's all Appleby, and they got up and they spoke, and basically they treated me very harshly. But I was young. I just took it and smiled, didn't react. And so they were going to vote on it the next meeting, which, generally you have a meeting one time in the month, and then later in the month you have another meeting. Well, they're going to vote again. Well, even a larger group came out to that meeting because that was going to be the important meeting. So I was in the superintendent's office with all 9 board members, and of course, I said, I'm not changing my mind. This is what I believe is best for kids. This is kids. This is about kids. So the board members walked out past me one at a time, and they shook my hand, and they said, sorry, Jack, but we can't support it. Sorry, Jack, we can't support it. So going into that meeting, the board basically told me that they weren't going to vote for it. But that the parents were so vicious that at the end of the meeting, I got a 9-0 vote to make the change. Talk about something that I learned. I learned a little bit about boards and how they can be very political and how parents can influence them. I also learned about parent groups. I found out that the band boosters, they're a pretty powerful group of people. And they had some say. But it was fascinating, and it turned out in the long run, in hindsight, 15, 20 years later, it was the best thing we ever did. And we had a #1 band program, music program. But those are the kinds of things that, again, it's working with parents. And sometimes parents are going to love you, and sometimes parents are not. But you must always stay true to what is best for the kid. And if you do that, and not let the politics or whatever's going on in the community or who the person is, you will survive it. It can be painful, but you can survive it.
Well, I love that story, and it's I think it's very encouraging as a young educator because at some point or other, I think every person that works in education at some point has to have that that moment where they realize politics are definitely in play, and there are some vicious people out there that may or may not want what's best for the children, or what you think is best for the children. So, but definitely been there, and that story is a huge encouragement.
I have one more thing I want to add, just a final thought. You wouldn't, I want you to think about what I call the business of education. Every person in your community has been to school. They've attended school. Some have had good experiences, some are bad experiences. So every person in your school believes that they know how school should work because they participated. I don't go to the doctor and say, "Hey, this is what I need." You're. I don't go to the banker and say so because I don't have any experience. But in school is the only business where the parents, your community, have all experienced it and they all have an opinion. And they all have an opinion how it should work. And that's what makes school business so uniquely different than anything else. And that's why it has shades of true business function, but it doesn't function like most businesses because of that piece, because everybody has been there.
Yeah, I love that. Even if we've been educated in a different way, almost every adult in America has attended school in some way, shape, or form through, first through 12th grade. Most have had kindergarten and pre-K. So whether that was in public, private, or homeschool, at some point they've experienced that. And I love the fact that you have that wonderful background where you've been in public school for years and years, private school for years, international school now. You've taught some at the collegiate level, and so it just gives you that kind of bird's eye view of everyone's experiences, or at least relate to everyone's experiences. But I want to shift here to you talked a little bit about those parent meetings and meeting with, what are their expectations, what are the students' expectations, making that pathway. So I'm going back a little bit, but I want to touch on how can the older generation connect to the younger generation. What are some ways, because like you said, a lot of middle schoolers, I was not middle schooler, but it hit me a little bit later in high school. But, sometimes they don't want that much involvement from their parents or their grandparents, or sometimes, the teachers would prefer not because they got a lawnmower parent on their hands or something. But what is a way that that gap can be filled? What is a connection point? I know you have sons, you have grandchildren. So can you speak a little bit to that personal relationship and how to kind of bring those two gens together?
Well, the fascinating difference with grandparents, I think, most recently, is grandparents are the parents. And that has really changed the dynamics of schools. Because of the fractured families, the grandparents are often the ones carrying the load. I'm in a situation with my oldest granddaughter. She's a senior now, and I'm involved with her and her stepfather and her mom and my son, and it creates a whole different dynamics of how you look at things. So grandparents have less of a tendency to sit back. I think in the years past, grandparents would just sort of look over things and not really react. But I think because of where society is nowadays, grandparents are very important because they are giving a stability to the family. And that's important, particularly at school, because if a kid doesn't have a stable family, they're not going to perform well at school. So grandparents, that's why we instituted Grandparents' Day a lot of times in private schools because, hey, they're a great source of money. Grandparents will shell out money for just about anything, and particularly for their grandkids. So they're a great source, but also they are a source of wealth. So we often would like to get grandparents in, particularly, let's take Veterans Day. Who do you bring in? You bring in the grandparents, the people the men and women who serve. You're again looking back to that, what I would call, the Bible would call the elder generation, your elders. And I think you have to bring the elders in. And I always found it very powerful when one of my teachers were foresighted enough, they would bring an older generation person in, whatever the topic might be. Might have been in social studies about social change, might have been a person that served in the war, or We had one gentleman that was from Vietnam. He was a captive, and he explained it's amazing how the kids hear what they say. And so I think it's our fault if we're not tapping that generation, because that generation really cares. And almost older people say, this world is going to blank in a handbasket, and there's that mentality. And I think by bringing them into the conversation, it just strengthens your culture in your school, because they need to be somewhat satisfied too that, well, things are bad, but at least here we have this culture that we're building together, and there's some stability. So I think it's again, schools are not really great at making connections. If we were, we're a multi-million-dollar business. Most school districts have a multi-million-dollar budget, and if you were a multi-million-dollar company, you would have a marketing firm. You had somebody in marketing and connections. Well, in schools, we don't do that. We just simply say, oh, we'll just put out a newsletter. That'll be good enough. So we missed this opportunity of dealing with this generation. But one of the things that we did in one of the schools I had, and this was, again, one of those side tangent pieces, in Pennsylvania, the board members set taxes. And, of course, when you set a tax rate and you increase it, the millage rate, the people who are hit are the people in fixed incomes. And so we got this idea that, hey, why don't we allow a person on a fixed income, if they are qualified and are capable, let's let them come into our school and work off by an hourly rate that we set for the amount of increase in their taxes. So if their taxes went up X number of dollars, they could work it off. And it was amazing how bringing in that older generation, for instance, one lady, she just loved to cut out all the stuff that the elementary teachers were putting that plastic, what's it called? Plastic on top, And she would sit there for hours and just cut it off, cut all the designs and things out for the elementary teachers. One liked to do something else. I had one in the high school that was an engineer, and he went to the chemistry lab, and he helped the teacher there. So, again, it's just making the connection and being creative. And one last one, I had an old guy who was a immigrant from Germany, and he was a blacksmith. And so I started a blacksmith shop in the school that I was at, and I was the resident blacksmith. But this guy he spoke with the heavy German accent. He had a twin brother who was in the Nazi youth. You don't think that he didn't have impact on the kids that I brought in and he could talk to, because they saw history. They saw history alive. The first ship that he was supposed to immigrate to America and got sunk by the Nazis. If he was on that ship, he would have died. I mean, the stories that he had, but also the experience when he would hammer steel and so forth, it was pretty fascinating. But that is where we need to be connecting in our community with the older generation. That's where grandparents and grandmas and stuff fit in, and it's just a natural fit. But again, remember what I said earlier. I don't have time. I don't have time to make the connection. I don't have time to do that. And we have to look at time differently and look at what we're doing differently to change that.
Well, thank you so much for those really practical examples and illustrations of how individual teachers and administrators can connect with grandparents, because it is so important, and the older generation has so much to learn. I love my grandparents, and I've learned so much from both sides, and I wish every kid could have that experience. And so I love that you gave so many applications or examples of how we can do that, because not every kid is blessed with a wonderful set of grandparents. But if we bring more of the older generation in, if we engage with them and bring them into the schools directly, that more kids can experience that, and I would hope it would be just as rewarding for the older generation as well. That being said, I know we're a little short on time, so I want to talk about two things. But first, I want to give a little plug for your book. So we've talked so much about reading and leadership and slow changes. And so I would love, would you tell us a little bit about the book that you and your buddy wrote?
Yeah, my friend Dr. Duff Rurick and I, we worked together probably 30 years. So this book happened after we both retired. And I said to him, on my bucket list, I want to at least co-author a book. So we wrote a book called First Choice, Changing the Habits of Education. And First Choice, that was one of the things that we started with the seniors. Every senior year we would survey the seniors and we asked them, did you get your first choice? Meaning we wanted the kids to come through, and so if they wanted to go to Harvard and that was their first choice, did they get first choice? Or if they wanted to be a welder at Grove Manufacturing, did they get their first choice? And so that became our sort of a mantra that we used, where you're getting your first choice. You realize that to give a class of 250 kids their first choice, you have to really change a lot of things that happen in school. You have to bring about a lot of change. And so that was the concept, and so that was our thing, First Choice, and changing how we did stuff. And so this book is really sort of a little book. It's not very many pages, but basically it's actually I didn't know you were going to do it, but actually every year we would publish a booklet that we would start the year with a theme. And we would say, this is our theme this year. This was every faculty member, even staff members, cafeteria workers. This was our theme, and from that, we changed a school district. We changed the whole way a school district functioned. In fact, it's still functioning very similarly to that now. Now it looks different because there's different people, but the foundation is still there. So. The First Choice book was written so you could read it as an educator or a leader, and you say, I wonder if that would work with us. I wonder if we could try that. The first thing we did, and I'll tell you a little secret, the first thing we did was we decided that we would sit down and talk to every teacher individually for half an hour. Do you think we learned anything? Yeah, we learned a lot. It's amazing when you open dialogue up like that, what you learned. And from that, we developed another theme. And it was just simple things like that. So this book is actually these documents, several chapters are actually these documents that we gave to every faculty member and every parent in the community that wanted it. And you're going to see what we did. It's nothing fancy. It isn't a bunch of highfalutin words or that kind of thing. It's just common sense, practical stuff that we did. And again, it wasn't something that we laid out for years and years and years and laid out this long plan that we're going to do. It was something that evolved as we went through, and we became sensitive to the people we were working with. And if you want to buy it, it's on Amazon. You can buy a Kindle version for like $2. It's real cheap.
You preempted my next question. Where can we find it? So definitely, viewers out there, listeners out there, go check out this book. Jack is phenomenal, and I think we should all read it. All right. Well, on behalf of the NWEF team, I'm so ecstatic that we get to work with you on a daily basis, especially given all that you've said. And I'm so glad that our listeners today get to meet you more and learn more about you. I know some of them have probably met you before when you were on State of Education and other things that you've been involved with over the years with NWEF, but it's just awesome to have you here with us now on a more daily basis. And so I would just love to hear your thoughts on how you feel Noah Webster Educational Foundation fits in with some of the things that you've been saying. How can we as an organization help people make these connections and relationships? And I think it's so important because we've talked about today all of the groups of people that we love to help: grandparents, parents, educators, school board members. So share with us what makes you excited about Noah Webster and what we're doing.
Well, first off, I think Noah Webster has an awesome vision about changing the culture of schools and going back and resurrecting some of the foundations that our schools were built on. Schools were, of course, I'll give you one more story. Schools were built originally on a three-legged milking stool. One leg was church, one leg was family, and one leg was school. And a three-legged stool you can set on any type of terrain. It can be irregular and it'll sit. It won't upset. But since our society has been changing, those legs have been corroded, have been actually eaten away. The church looks different than what it did in the beginning. So does the family looks different. So the legs in the store become far more unstable. So I think Noah Webster is attacking the problem, and I think the founder Melvin has done a phenomenal job in growing that and in looking at boards and how boards should react. And I shared on another podcast that, if you think about board members, they get elected. They all have gone to school, like I said before, and they all have an agenda. But the unfortunate part is they've never been trained. So essentially, when they go to the board meeting, it's like on-the-job training. And sometimes they last and sometimes they don't. If you're a lawyer or a doctor, you have learned your information about your profession, and now you get to practice it. Well, the unfortunate part is board members practice on your children because they're learning the business. And so that's why I think Noah Webster is right on track in that we have to be training board members and give them training before they step into the boardroom so they know what they can do, what they can't do, what they should be doing, how to interact. And my particular expertise is taking the boardroom and bringing it to the classroom. And I think that's a piece that that I can add to the mix, is that we have to take board action, board policy. First, it needs to be grounded for the right reasons, and then we need to be able to make sure that impact gets to the classroom. Just making a decision on a policy as a board doesn't guarantee it changes anything in the classroom. There's a whole lot of stuff in between that filters down that you have to get through before you get to the classroom. And so I think that's something boards need to understand. And I think that's why these board summits that Noah Webster has put on, and we're planning another one in January, is so important to get board members thinking about their decision isn't just a political decision. Their decision has impact. And how does it impact the classroom? And if we do want it to impact the classroom, how do we get it there? So I think those are all important pieces to the puzzle. And I think Noah Webster, with his connections with the politicians and the state government, I think all that is very, very positive, and I think it's needed because we can have a tendency to be a silo to ourselves, our schools, different school districts and different school systems. So I think that is good. But the next step is taking that information and helping boards function better. And remember that key word I used early on, relationships. Relationships are key in boards. And we have to make sure that we're building those kinds of relationships. And if you have animosity at your board, or if you have animosity between the board and the next level of leadership, say the superintendent, all that spills down, just like it spills down when mom and dad are fighting in the kitchen, to the child that's in the living room. I mean, there is the same comparison can be made. And so it's very important, and I think Noah Webster has broken a barrier that we've needed to be involved in for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was actually doing some research just this morning that showed that for every, on average, for every school board member, districts tend to have between 1,000 to 2,500 students in them. So realistically, a school board member, when they're working on policy, could influence up to 2,500 kids. And that's a pretty scary idea if it's a school board member that isn't trained or maybe doesn't have the best interest in heart. And we would hope that the majority of school board members do have the best interest of children at heart, and many of them do, but they do need that training and that education. And I really feel like Melvin's original vision for filling that gap and stepping in and educating school board members and teaching them about things like FOIA, etc., can be super helpful. And specifically this upcoming year, I think we have a lot to look forward to. We have an upcoming summit hoping to branch out into webinars and continue to reach more and more school board members. So that's definitely at least something that excites me at the moment, and it's going to lead to some exciting impact, I believe.
Right. One more point that I'll make, Catherine, just so to drive the point home. Working at the level that Melvin has been working has been good because there's so many things in schools that are mandated, which means somewhere along the line, somebody up higher up than a school district says, this is what you will do. And if you looked at all the mandates that schools have to do, that they're not given choice, sometimes they're not even funded. Most times they're not even funded. If you look at those things, it becomes scary. And so it's important to be working at that level too, to make sure that we don't get some of those crazy mandates that really we struggle with, knowing how to implement. And really, sometimes we struggle with it from a very moral perspective. We don't agree with it. We think it's not right. So I think there's an important place for that. I think how we're growing Noah Webster with Melvin is taking it so we can do those issues and also do the issues towards the classroom. I think that's all important because that's what makes us a better system all the way around.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and that's what makes Noah Webster to me such a dream organization to work for. Is because on the one hand, we have that broad vision of this is how we help policy and school board members and administrations, but we're also on the other hand able to come alongside parents and equip them and educators and support them. And so we're really hitting it from both the big perspective and the small not perspective, I would say, because I think a parent's perspective is huge, but we're hitting it from the smallest detail to the largest policy. And that makes it a phenomenal organization, in my opinion. But let's move on to talking about some just practical takeaways. So what would you say to our audience today? What are some practical things they could do? And you can speak to any group that you'd like, or you can speak to all groups, but what is like some practical call to actions, some steps that they can take today to make an impact in their children's lives?
Well, I think probably the first misnomer I want everybody to accept is that there is power in one. You can be very powerful as one. It's just that you need to realize that you need to be a good communicator and share that. It isn't about going out rallying a group of rebels and taking over or whatever. It's about being confident enough to take your issues and your concerns to the person that can do maybe help you out. So if it's a school concern, go to the principal, talk. Go to the assistant principal, go to the counselor. Typically, we have this mentality, I call it the hammer mentality. We want to go to the school board right away and not deal with the layers beneath, and because sometimes some of these situations could be solved and actually make it better for everybody. So I think all groups need to understand that, at least here in Noah Webster, as long as I am here, you're welcome to contact Noah Webster, and if you have a question, we'll try to help you find an answer, or we'll give you what I would call a down-home practical answer. The point being is you're not alone. The issue is that we have lost our independence and our sense that we can be independent thinkers and we can share thoughts, and it is important what we say. And we want to join a group or we want to get some kind of identity, but you have a very powerful voice if you're a parent or if you're a grandparent or if you're a taxpayer or if you're just a resident, because this community is yours. It's your community. And so you can either fight for it or you can say, well, it's not going to make any difference. They don't listen. Well, they'll never listen if you don't ask. So my question to you is don't be afraid, or my suggestion to you is don't be afraid to ask. Ask the question, and you may be very pleased with the answer. And I strongly suggest you do that because a child's education is at stake every time that you don't ask the question. Yeah. And we can't afford to lose any more children. We are losing children. We're losing children to drugs and social issues, and it's amazing. I mean, the things that I dealt with in the 70s, are irrelevant today because the things that they're doing with now are just unbelievable to me. I would never have thought it would be imaginable. So silence is the worst thing that you can be. So I suggest that my call to you is don't be silent. Ask your questions. If you don't know where to go, you can contact us. I'm sure Catherine can give you a contact space, but that's what we're here for because together we can make the world better. And I think that's important. And it's done one child at a time, one question at a time, one parent at a time, one school at a time, one classroom at a time. It's always a factor of one. And isn't going to be a broad stroke kind of deal. It's just one at a time. And that's how we changed the school district. We just met with one parent at a time, one parent at a time. And not every one of them embraced it. It's just something that we have to do. And we have lost that, I think, in American society. We need to be more proactive and stand up and share. That's my speech.
So everyone, if you would like to contact us, like Jack mentioned, feel free to email us at info@nwef.org, and we would love to welcome your questions and answer them to the best of our ability, and help alongside you to impact that next one child and many more thereafter. I'd also like to make a separate call to action, again, that you should definitely check out Jack's book. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jack. It's lovely to have you, and I appreciate you sharing all of your experiences and wisdom with us today. It's been fantastic.
It's been enjoyable. I will gladly do it anytime. You just call me up.
I definitely will. I definitely will. All right. Have a good one.